Hi there, my name is Bruce and I'm here with Jay and Dana, and this is Startup Disc's Full Tech Chat, where we talk about all things tech. Today we are talking about digital photography and we have a very special guest. So I would like to welcome to the stream Hal Bergman. How are you today?
I'm good. Yeah,
that's good. That's good. So, for those who don't know, Hal is a professional photographer and videographer. I will pass it over to you now to just give us a quick little rundown about yourself and what you do.
So I run a small-scale, full-service video production company with my wife. We have a few different outputs, clients, projects that we work on. I think a lot of your audience would know us through the Magic Window series of apps. So we have 24-hour wallpaper, which Apple ripped off from us in 2015 or 2016. We have way more scenes in them. So that sets your desktop wallpaper to the time of day. We have 8 or 9 apps for Apple TV. They're all under the Magic Window name, and there's one called Magic Fireplace, which gives you, I think, 25 different fireplaces that you can run a loop and you get that fireplace vibe. We have a aerial screensaver that's it's an addendum to I think it's just called Aerial Saver for Mac, that pulls in the default Apple TV aerial videos, and we have another 80 more that are set up by category, so like cities, nature, landscapes. So our business, about 3/4 of what we do is stock footage. So we do establishing shots for Getty Images. We're a full production company. So in the last month, we've done 4 different productions where it was on location. We did casting. We just create stock footage that anyone can license and use for any purpose. And we do freelance work. We fly drones around construction sites and container terminals, and I shoot architectural interiors. Basically, I've found a way to take photos and video that I think look cool, and people give me money for it, and I'm stoked on that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we'll be putting links in the description. It sounds to me like you're one of the sort of few people in the world that have turned a hobby into a career. So, well done, you. So, turned a passion into a career, I should say. Yes,
it's fun.
Yeah. So there will be links in the description to your work. Now, as I say, we're going to be talking about fairly broad technical chat about digital photography. It sounds to me like you are incredibly well qualified to comment on this stuff. So I will just sort of kick this off just to talk about essentially the very first digital camera ever made. And I am going to just sort of I'm just going to share my screen very quickly and show this. This is the very first digital camera ever made. It was made at Kodak. And it was very big, very heavy. But what it did do is it did take a photograph using a CCD, which we'll talk about in a moment. It was able to then sort of store it in some sort of memory on there, and then it would actually dump the photo onto this cassette tape. So the storage medium was actually a cassette tape for that. Now this is, so this was 1973. It's quite the thing. But so for people who think the digital photography is a more recent thing, you can see that the first photos were taken in 1973. Now, having said that, it was very, very impractical, and it didn't really take off. There was never a consumer version of this particular product that made it.
So no one actually took that on vacation to Egypt and started snapping.
No, that's right. Stand in front of Giza. Yeah, no, they did not. So anyhow, that's I just thought I would mention that because that's where it all starts, and then of course we then did start getting some sort of consumer cameras that were a lot smaller and a lot more practical. And I'll probably just sort of take this opportunity to mention what the very first digital camera that I ever owned was, and it was a Kodak, so Kodak again, It was a Kodak DC265. I've got a picky of it here. So this was the very first camera that I owned. It cost me around about 2,000 Australian dollars at the time. And it actually has that amazing word at the bottom, megapixel. So
1 megapixel.
Yeah, 1 megapixel. I think it was about 1.3, something like that from memory. It had this little screen at the back there like that. And one of the things that made this particular camera so famous at the time was the fact that you could install Doom on it. So you could actually use the little rocker button at the back there for forward and backward and whatever, and you could use I think it was the photograph button or something like that, or one of the other buttons there to fire, and so you could actually play Doom with that particular camera. Now, I absolutely loved that camera; it's fantastic, and I remember up until that point, I think digital cameras were a little bit more gimmicky. People weren't, if you were someone who shot analog photography with a decent camera and you were comparing it to shots you were getting from a digital camera, they just weren't on par. They really weren't. And that particular camera, I did actually start taking most photos with that. I still had an analog SLR camera, but I started taking most of my photography with that, and I even got some of the prints printed out, and they looked really good. So it really was starting to get into that realm of digital, starting to properly challenge sort of analog photography. But one massive limitation that camera had was that when you pressed the button to take a photo, there was a pause before it would actually take it, and that was just the time it took for for it to capture the data and then store it onto your SD card, and that was something that was, if you were trying to capture a moment in a sports game or something like that, you just had no hope with a camera like that. You couldn't just sort of point and click; you would miss the moment. So what about you guys? Tell us about your first experiences with digital photography. How about you, Hal?
So the first camera I owned was a Nikon Coolpix 995. And if that rings a bell to anyone, it may or may not, it was the camera that twisted. So one half was the camera and the lens, and the other half was the screen and the the card.
I remember that.
And that was, I think that was over $1,000, and that was my high school graduation gift from my parents. And it was not as good at the time as a film camera, and in college, that's the one. Yep.
It's the first picture I found. It's absolutely disgusting from eBay, but I want people to see it.
I've got it on a shelf around here somewhere. Actually, I see it right now. I should go grab it. It doesn't work anymore. But yeah, that shot JPEGs. It was 3 megapixels in that range. But yeah, let's see. In college, I was trying to make the decision between, do I buy a DSLR, which was, I think, 5 or 6 megapixels at the time, if that, or buy a film scanner, because they were about the same price. And I went with a film scanner, and that wound up not being a good investment. Apparently it is now. A friend of mine told me that the film scanners on eBay are going for more than what I paid for it in 2003. But yeah, the film scanner would do, like, I think 20 megapixel scans. And at that time, like, I needed the biggest file I could get. So I had my digital camera, which was kind of fun, but I couldn't do a lot of the things with it that I needed to be able to do in photography school, which was like hooking up to strobes, sync the shutter with flashes, that kind of thing. And it was JPEG, so there was a limited amount of adjustment you could do in post. It wasn't quite what you can do with a raw image now, where you can adjust the white balance or in some cases adjust the ISO in post. That camera was just like, here's JPEG. Pretty good for 2002. Yeah, that was mine.
Yeah. And how about you, Jay? What was your first digital camera?
My first digital camera, and I do have a photo here, was a Fujifilm FinePix A204 with
that's a lovely low resolution image.
Yeah, I was not prepared. Okay, I thought I had it on my desktop, and I did. So that's the front. Here's the back, And it was my first digital camera, so I was psyched. It did everything I wanted it to do, as long as it went slow. Moving target, forget about it. You take the little cover off the front, had to wait for the lens to come out, had to wait for it to kind of boot up, and then you can take a picture. But it was my introduction into digital photography. And the thing is, even though it was a really crappy camera, I made it work. I really learned how to get the most out of that camera. And some of my best lightning shots, I'm one of the crazy people that climbs up on a roof when there's a lightning storm to get the best photo of it. Some of my best lightning shots I took with that camera. Just by timing it manually, knowing when to press the button, knowing how it would react. And yeah, I love that camera. I still have it in pieces somewhere because I never dropped it. It just started falling apart. Screws came out, stuff just started falling off, and I never could get rid of it, so it's in a box somewhere. Fond memories of that thing.
How about you, Dana? What was your first digital camera?
So my very first was this right here.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's fancy. I couldn't afford Apple stuff.
Was it, what was that, 640 by 480, or if the high quality was like 800 by 600, something like that.
Wow.
Show off.
And it was,
I never owned one, but the school would let me borrow one and take it home.
I still have it
like a
downstairs.
flat pancake.
I've got the box and everything, all the everything that came with it. But I remember, in order to get good color, you had to just basically point at something and wait until the photoreceptors or whatever. Because if you didn't, everything looked really yellow, especially if you were under fluorescent light.
So it was like some sort of white balance going on.
Yeah. And but yeah, I've took quite a few pictures with it. But and then my second was Sony CyberShot, and I've been trying to find pictures of the damn thing, but they're not exactly what mine looked like.
I'll find one later on and plonk it on there in post-production. How about that?
I'll go get the camera and let you know what model it is, because I can't remember offhand, but I think it was like 5 megapixels or 3 megapixels, something like that. And I did use it quite a bit. I took little videos with that and stuff, but like I said, that was right before the advent of the smartphones and like camera phones and things like that. So I didn't get a whole lot of use.
That camera I just mentioned, it did take video. The photos were 2 megapixel for the time. It didn't even fit on my 17-inch monitor, but the video it took was like this big. You can barely see anything.
That's right.
Still have this.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, wow. Look at that. That is so fancy. So I have a quick little anecdote to tell about my very first digital camera. So having spent a significant amount of money on this thing, I was fairly protective of it. And one night, I think it was actually Christmas Eve, I went to the pub with a group of friends, and I was about to leave. I'd been there, sort of for several hours and drinking, and one of my friends, he's a very handsome gentleman, never had any problem striking up a conversation with ladies. He was chatting to these 2 girls standing at the front of the pub, and the discussion got onto this digital camera. Okay, yeah, we're going to take a photo, no worries. So he was taking the photo of these 2 girls, and just as he was about to press the button, one of the girls lifted up the top of one of the other girls. So literally, I've just gone blue for some reason.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes, did it when I raised my hand. Whoa, and I went back again. I won't raise my hand anymore. So anyhow, one of the girls lifted up the top of one of the other girls, and then he took the photograph. Now, immediately they went rushing towards the camera to look at the back of it. And this is, of course, a really interesting thing that digital photography has brought, is that people wanting to see the photo straight away. Everyone coming to the camera to look at the screen in the back to vet it, that's good or it's bad, or we need to take another one, that sort of thing. Which, of course, in analog photography, you never had that problem. You didn't get to find out until later on.
Yeah, it's on film.
So anyhow, they came and they were trying to grab the camera, because the girl whose top was lifted up was none too pleased about it. Now, I started getting a bit freaked out because this was a $2,000 camera. I'm like, nah, I've had enough. So I just reached over and I grabbed the camera, and I was already on my way home anyway. So I just said, okay, guys, I'm off now. See you later. Started walking home. Now, what a storm that ended up creating, because the girl's boyfriend then turned up. Now, by this stage, I was gone. I've headed home, but the girl's boyfriend turned up. You know, where's the photo? Where's the photo? You know, this massive issue being caused about this. You know, about this photo, and like, this, you know, a friend of mine managed to calm him down and said, "Look, the photo got deleted. It's all fine and everything." But anyhow, the point at the end of the story is, because of the delay of the photo, you know, click, you know, he went like that, click, and then he lowered it, and then it took the photo. So all we got was a photo of the ground. So after all that, there was no damaging, you know, sort of photo or anything taken, because we basically got a photo of the ground. So
I was expecting you to go, and here's the photo right now.
You guys remember? Well, maybe not you, Hal, because your first SD card was probably 5 million times the size of my first SD card. But I could go all day, go into town with a box full of AA batteries, which is what my camera took. No battery pack or anything. An 8 megabyte SD card, and I could be out all day taking photos, come back, and still have space left over. Is that? And the pictures were decent too. Is that something you guys had, or did you have a whole bag full of SD cards with you at all times?
With the first one, the compact flash cards that it took compact flash cards, they were so expensive. It had like an 8 megabyte one, and that filled up pretty darn quick.
So this one was compact flash, and when I used this heavily, which was 2003 through 2000. By 2002 to 2004 is when I took all my pictures with this camera. You could buy, so I don't remember what size, I want to say it was like probably 512 megabytes were the compact flash cards, and those were expensive. But you could buy, does anybody remember a microdrive? So I bought a microdrive for this, which was 4 gigabytes. Yeah, that sounds right. I think there were 2 and 4 gigabytes, and it was a little spinner hard drive in a compact flash card.
Compact flash, yeah.
For the same price as, I think, a 512 megabyte compact flash card, you could get 4 gigabytes. The problem is they were really slow. So once you filled up the buffer on the camera, it would have to wait, and it would drain the battery like crazy.
I bet they weren't very shock resistant either.
They were not very shock resistant, which is why I stopped using them. But yeah,
they were double height, weren't they? They were a lot thicker than a standard compact flash
card. They were a little
bit
thicker, but they did fit in here, and I'll bet I've got one in a drawer somewhere. But yeah, they were not very shock resistant. But yeah, that was how I got around that. And this, if I recall correctly, shot 3 megabyte JPEGs or 10 megabyte TIFFs, which would fill up pretty quick if I was going out for a day. But it was still a lot better than 36 photos on
a standard conventional film. That's right. Yeah. Well, the sort of media storage, I guess, is probably the next thing, because that's something that digital cameras did, was, of course, you know, create this incredible market of SD card storage and solid state storage. Now, compact flash is the first one that I have a recollection of. I think compact flash was the first, but it may not have been. But of course, then a lot of different camera manufacturers started to try and create their own, to then perhaps own an extra little piece of the market. So we obviously had compact flash, and then we had secure digital, or SD. There's mini SD, there's micro SD. The smart media. Olympus had its own, which was Olympus XD cards.
Sony had their own too.
Sony had their own, which is the Sony memory stick. And there was another one called multimedia card. And the interesting thing is that while each of them were probably hoping that the technology they had adapted or created was going to be the winner, at this stage we've pretty much got down to SD card, or the variations of SD or micro SD, or compact flash. It's my understanding that the top of the line professional cameras are still using compact flash. Is that the case, Hal?
Yeah, so the DSLRs I have, which are like 5 years old now, they're compact flash and SD. and I wasn't expecting SD to actually kind of win the war, but they're now cheaper for more capacity and they're much smaller. But yeah, the really high end of the market is using CFast, which is the same size and shape as compact flash, but it's actually like a full SSD. I couldn't tell you what the difference between what's in a compact flash card and what's in a SSD is. Maybe one of you talk about that, but they're significantly faster. But they look the same. This is a CFast reader, but they're really fast. They're 500 megabytes per second, maybe faster than that. In fact, they might be faster than that. I have to check, but they're extremely expensive. I bought a 512 gigabyte one somewhere around here. Actually, it's in my video camera, and they're about $1 per gigabyte right now.
So why were you surprised that SD card won?
Because they're smaller, and I'm surprised they won on price and capacity just because they're smaller. I thought that you'd be able to pack a lot more data on. Oh, here's a CFast card. It looks just like a compact flash card.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, I'm surprised they won because they're so much smaller. It's a lot harder to pack density that way. So I would think that compact flash would win out, at least in price. But somehow compact flash cards are more expensive than.
This is the thing that I always found, is that SD always seemed to be cheaper than compact flash, and so
I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. But maybe there's just they're more popular, so there's a higher there's economy of scale in manufacturing them.
It's my understanding that a compact flash card actually uses a similar output, or as an IDE drive. So if you are wanting to adapt a compact flash card to an IDE connection, I think it's virtually just lining up pins.
I believe it. I haven't gone that deep, but that makes sense to me.
Sorry. Okay.
I wanted to ask, and this is not a statement because I'm not sure, but I believe our good friend Steve from Mac84 has cameras that take floppy disks, don't they?
Sony Mavica.
Yes, the old Sony Mavica.
So was that the first, or was that just a variation of?
I think the Mavica was more of a gimmick than anything, because I think a lot of removable media at the time was very expensive, and this allowed you to take photos using floppy media, which is very, very cheap. Very, very impractical. But I am pretty sure that compact flash cameras already existed when the Sony Mavica came out, but I think that compact flashes were very expensive to buy. So,
and can I ask you experts? I've only ever had SD cards from my first camera to my last digital camera, and then I went over to cell phone cameras. Reliability-wise, I still have my first 8 megabyte SD card, which is still fully functional. Is compact flash and all the other ones, are they just as reliable, or is SD the clear king when it comes to reliability?
I mean, I've got CF or compact flash and SD cards that are years and years and years old. And the only reason I replace them is because the cost to replace them. Like, I'll just replace the smallest one to the bigger ones. So I don't know one way or another. I don't have any experience with them outright failing on me. It just hasn't happened. I've had CFast cards outright fail on me, but I haven't had compact flash or SD cards fail. I've lost them. Come up with.
That's different.
I've lost them after an entire day of shooting, which is a as far as like long run reliability, I use them a ton and have had. I don't know if there's any way to figure out how much read-write data I've put onto these, but a lot, and they've been pretty reliable. To go back to the last question, I actually looked it up. So compact flash is significantly faster than SD. The fastest SD cards in the market right now are 95 megabytes per second. The fastest compact flash cards are about 200 megabytes per second, and the reason you go CFast is the fastest ones of those are 550 megabytes per second. Not megabits, megabytes.
Yes, I was going to say, most of the time, if you happen to be in a shop and you're looking at someone's selling an SD card or anything to you, they will always quote their speed in megabits per second. So if you're swearing at the screen right now, going, "I've got an SD card that does 200," they're talking about megabits per second. So if we're talking about 8 bits a byte, take that and divide it. Take that amount and divide it by 8, and that'll tell you what the real speed is. So interestingly enough, this little thing that I was showing before, this is actually a compact flash to SD card adapter. So you can actually, and this is basically what I use with my with my DSLR, because SD card is a lot cheaper, and even though this is definitely not as fast as if I just bought a compact flash, it's fast enough for what I do. And it's way cheaper to just be using SD cards rather than compact flash cards. And even, I mean, I can just walk down. I can buy an SD card at the grocery store. I cannot buy a compact flash card at the grocery store. I need to go in and buy that specially from someone. So, that for me, the SD, having a little adapter like this is a very handy little thing to have.
So with compact flash being that much faster, and I'm guessing, but probably the standard around 2005-ish for most professional users, it suddenly makes sense why our good friend Mike has an iMac G5 prototype that takes compact flash cards instead of SD cards. Because
SD was always considered the consumer one, and compact flash was always considered the professional one. My guess now, based on looking this up, is entirely on speed.
But so maybe Apple was going for a professional iMac G5 model with that prototype he has.
They could well have, cool. Yeah, interesting. So I guess probably at this stage what I might do is we'll just do a quick little kind of back to basics thing and talk just about cameras in general. I'm just going to show this little image here quickly just to talk about just the absolute basics of photography, what we're talking about here. And basically what happens is you have your subject there, which is the person with the soccer ball there, and it goes through a lens. That lens shrinks the image down and flips it, and then it projects onto whatever the medium is that you're capturing. It's something that is light sensitive. And if we're talking about an old traditional camera, that would have been some film. And these days in a modern camera, you'll be looking at a CCD or a charge coupled device, which will then capture that. And in order to make sure that you capture it just for the right amount of time, you have a shutter. And so the shutter will open, let the light in, and then close very quickly. And then you've got that light captured, as I say, whether that be on old film or whether it be on a CCD. And so that is the general, I guess, physics of taking a photograph, which has sort of been around for a very, very long time, since I guess it was the late 19th century, I think, when they first started taking photographs. So that's, basically what we have with the basics of photography. Now I'd like to talk about SLR, or single lens reflex, and they're generally the choice of camera for a professional. And what happens with an SLR, and I'm just going to show this now, is you have the light coming through the lens, and then it hits a mirror, and then that bounces up into a little prism, and then it looks out the viewfinder. Now, what this means is when you look through that viewfinder, you're actually looking out the lens. You're seeing the actual image from the lens. The alternative to this is that you would have just a standard viewfinder camera where they actually would have the lens there, but then you'll have a separate viewfinder, which is a completely separate entity, and you're looking through the viewfinder, and it's meant to approximate what the lens is looking at. Whereas a single lens reflex is actually showing you're actually viewing it through the lens itself. And when you go to take the photograph, that little mirror flips up to allow the light in underneath it. So for that brief moment when the mirror flips up, you can't actually see through the viewfinder anymore because it's blocked, but it takes the photo, and then that mirror flips back down again. And that's the concept of a single lens reflex camera.
And that's the iconic sound, right, from an SLR.
Yep. The mirror going up, the shutter opening, closing, the mirror coming down. I've gone blue again. Oh,
stop moving your hand. Just stop moving.
I don't know why this is happening.
Do you have like a gesture that controls the white balance?
Yeah. I don't know. Wow. Anyhow, let me temporarily override that. No, anyhow, why it is a real advantage to have a single lens reflex is when you are talking about professional DSLR cameras, you have interchangeable lenses. So you might have a wide angle lens, and then you might have a telephoto lens, and each time it means that when you look through the viewfinder, you're actually seeing through the lens you have connected to the camera. Oh, there we go. We're back again.
Is this the right time to introduce a few fighting words?
Oh, go for it.
Okay. It is my opinion that digital cameras, and I'm talking consumer to mid, a little bit more expensive than consumer, quality-wise, did not catch up to film until, from what I've seen, 2015, 2016. At least. I still saw film wildly outperform digital in those years.
One of the things that I would say is that one of the advantages that film has is not infinite resolution, but analog resolution. So you are only limited by the
size of the grain.
Yeah, the grain of the actual film that you're shooting. So it gives you that ability to get, nice sharp images. When you shoot with a digital camera, you are limited by the resolution of the CCD. Oh, and then there's the other thing. There is also the dynamic range. So that is the darkest point versus the lightest point. What is the dynamic range that's going to be able to capture? And that's something that's greatly improved with CCD technology over the years. From the very early days to now, the range that those CCDs can now pick up in terms of what is the darkest part of the image and what is the lightest part of the image of all the same image, the one image that you are, that range of lightness that you're able to pick up. Now, film had the advantage there that it had a better dynamic range than the CCDs that were available in the early days. So I would say that once upon a time, yes, you had the advantage of resolution and you had the advantage of dynamic range. Now, as to when you would consider that being a point that the digital would start to potentially replace analog does depend on the application. If you're talking about someone who is wanting to shoot super high resolution stuff that's going to be enlarged up to a poster or something like that, it would have taken quite some time before a digital camera would be able to compete with that, because it just doesn't have the resolution in order to do that for that particular purpose.
Well, let's narrow it down to sharpness and color.
The highest end of the market just around new Nikon or Canon mirrorless cameras in the video segment, like the very high end of the market, are just catching up to what film is capable of in terms of dynamic range, which is roughly about it's hard to make a comparison because with digital photography, your dynamic range goes from, let's give it a chart, from like 0 to 256, 0 being black, 256 being white. The best way to describe dynamic range is like if you have a meter stick. Anything that's longer than a meter you can't measure. It's outside of your dynamic range, and the notches on it for centimeters or millimeters are the smallest amount of dynamic range. So you can't measure anything effectively that's smaller than a millimeter. So that's your dynamic range there. With digital photography, you can only capture between black and white. Once something is so bright that it's white, there's no information after that. We call it clipping. So you can't push or pull. If you accidentally overexpose your image, like you're shooting into the sun and that area is completely white, is 256 value, anything that's brighter than that cannot be measured. Likewise, if you underexpose, you can't really stretch that out very much with digital photography. You're pulling data out of your blacks, you're going to start seeing tons and tons of grain, and in this case, it's digital noise immediately. With film, you don't have those hard stops of dynamic range. So it's really, you don't quite have an apples to apples comparison. You have roughly 15 stops of dynamic range, but with digital, once you overexpose or you underexpose, there's no information there. You can't recover it. With film, because it's analog, there's just a little bit more like roll off there, where if you're shooting into the sun, it's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. And then at some point you've actually like burned the film. But because it's an analog, you have a little bit more on the edge of your ruler. You can kind of like, I don't have a good analog off the top of my head. But there's not this like set dynamic range. As film has interesting properties, one of which, if we want to get really technical, is called reciprocity failure, which if we really want to go into the weeds, I can explain reciprocity failure. But effectively, as things get to one edge of the dynamic range of the film or the other, one stop isn't quite one stop. It's more like 90% of a stop. As you keep compounding, there's still a little bit more, like you can cram a little bit more water into the jug than it's really designed for. It's like maybe the jug expands a little bit more. So there's not this like hard limit. So that's the advantage of film. For resolution, I think in the consumer market, that's going to start depending on lenses, because when you go to the low end of the consumer market, like your phone, the lenses in phones are extremely good, and this is probably as good or better than a good DSLR with film 20 years ago. But what kind of film are you talking about? With a digital camera, as you increase the ISO, you're going to get more gain and noise, but you still have those pixels there. You've just got gain and noise in there. With film, the faster your ASA or ISO is, the bigger the grains are. So 100 ISO film, and not all 100 ISO film, but like Fuji and Fuji had like smaller grains for ISO 100, but different brands of film had slightly different size of grains and grain spacing. But if you went to ISO 800 film, and then you blew that up, it would be a lot, like effectively lower resolution, because the pieces of grain would be much larger, and those got much larger much more quickly. So if you're shooting at night, if you're shooting like ISO 1600 high speed film, and you could then push that in the darkroom to get a little bit more range out of it. If you looked at that with just a 35 millimeter and you put your eye up to it, you could see that like really crunchy grain, and that was a look a lot of people went for. But digital cameras have, especially in low light, have long surpassed what film is capable of a long time ago. But
it's worth mentioning that the ISO that we're referring to, so with conventional film, you could buy film of a different, what they call it, a different speed or a different ISO for different purposes. So you would buy film that had a greater light sensitivity. So if you were going to be potentially going out and filming something at a party at nighttime or something, you could go out and get yourself a 400 film or an 800 film. Typically when people were filming daylight, you would usually have a 100. And so you could go out and get yourself this film which would be better suited for shooting in lower light. And the trade-off was that it was grainier. So you would be able to capture more light, but the trade-off was that final image was going to have more grain in it. But as Hal just mentioned, that in some photography, that was actually a look. With digital cameras, they generally have the digital SLRs, they have like an ISO setting. And what that does is that, again, is increasing the light sensitivity of the CCD, but the trade-off with that is not.
It's increasing the gain.
Okay, it's increasing the gain. So
it's increasing the gain.
Okay, so I should have just handed this over to you, shouldn't I? And so the trade-off with that is, again, that you get noise, is what I'd call it, rather than grain. I suppose you could call it grain, but it generally, you'll find that image, if you zoom right into a dark area, if you're shooting on a very high ISO on a digital camera, you'll find you get like this really kind of, it's not a particularly nice look, noise of like scattered color and stuff throughout, which again is the trade-off you get for that being able to shoot in lower light. Did that all make reasonable sense?
It did. but I'd like to top it off with a final question regarding this. If I give someone like you, Hal, budget is not an option. Is not a concern. Yeah. I ask you to take a picture of, I don't know, I'm getting married. Take a wedding photo. I'll pose for it. I'll find a girl that's crazy enough to marry me, and I want you to take the photo. You can take any digital camera you want, or any analog with any film, or whatever the best setup is. You can have it. What's going to get you the best photo of my wedding?
That's a really difficult question, because once you get to the high end of the market, for weddings, I don't do weddings, so I don't actually know what the best camera specifically for a wedding would be. But I guarantee if you asked a wedding photographer, there are probably 3 cameras that are really great at that. But when you get to the really high end of the market, cameras start to really specialize. You have cameras that are designed for astrophotography that have like active cooling systems in them. You have cameras that are designed for studio work, which is most of the cameras that I'm using. Even though I'm not doing a whole lot of studio work, I'm mostly using studio cameras. You have cameras that are more geared for sports. To give you an example, when you're shooting in a studio, you want extremely sharp lenses and you want a very high megapixel, and you're not quite as concerned with dynamic range. That's always a good thing, but when you're shooting in the studio, you're lighting everything. So you have complete control over the light that's going to the sensor, and you're not like going to take that outside and shoot into the sun. You don't need a massive dynamic range. When you're shooting sports, your highest priority is how fast can you take the pictures. If you take a burst, a studio camera might take 1 picture, or I would say maybe 2 or 3 pictures a second, which is not that fast of a recycle rate, but a camera that can shoot sports is going, it's almost shooting a video if you hold down the shutter. They're not particularly high resolution images. They're not particularly high dynamic range images, but you can shoot them extremely quickly, and you definitely are going to nail that shot. And with Astro, to use the far other end of the spectrum, you want tons and tons and tons of dynamic range. You want tons and tons and tons of resolution, and you want things in it that so the sensor stays cool. The sensor's not going to create more noise to it. You want as much, you want as high a signal to noise ratio, as high a signal to noise ratio as possible. But the shutter is going to be open for a minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. So different cameras are going to excel at completely different things. And the cameras that I use for studio stuff are probably not going to be great for a wedding. A medium format camera is not going to be great for a wedding. But again, a sports camera might not give you the biggest image that you want.
Right.
But I think
ask a wedding photographer.
I think with I understand sort of the point you're trying to make, Jay, but I think what you have to remember at this stage is that regardless of whether you're potentially going to get the better shot with a conventional film versus digital, the one really, really important thing, the real selling point of digital photography, which is the reason why it's doing so well, is that, number one, you can see the end result straight away. So you can review what you've taken right away. If something has gone wrong with that photo, there's some sort of technical glitch, there's the big, someone spat on your lens or something like that, you're going to see it straight away. So that's number one. Then the other is, of course, the fact that you can take as many as you like. Rather than trying to get that one golden shot, let's take 100 and pick the best. And that's something that you have with digital photography that you don't have as much with analog photography. And so for those, they, to me, are the reason why, under the circumstances you just gave there with the wedding photographer, they would want to go with a digital camera.
Makes sense. I was trying to figure out if there's still a place in this world at the time of recording, 2022, for film photography. If it's, I cannot think of a single scenario where I would go and buy an analog camera with a roll of film and whatever, because my life is now with a kid all about fast-moving objects that I'm trying to take a cute photo of. So for me, it's an iPhone. It's not even an SLR or anything. I need to have it in my pocket, ready to go. That's my life now when it comes to digital photography. But yeah, I don't really take photos of lunar eclipses or stuff like that. So,
well, the something that you mentioned there, Hal, about astrophotography, which I've done a bit of, is one of the things that happens these days with a lot of astrophotography is rather than sitting there with one single long exposure, they do multiple exposures and stacking. And so what that is you take a whole series of photos. So rather than leaving your lens, I mean, let me give you an example. Let's just say I'm wanting to take a photo of a nebula. Oh my God, I've gone blue again. And
let me try it. No?
Yeah, okay. So let's just say I'm trying to take a photo of a nebula, and I set up my telescope with my camera there, and I'm going to set the exposure for an hour. I've got a telescope that actually tracks in relation to the rotation of the Earth, so what I'm photographing is always going to be in the center of the image. So I leave it open for an hour. While I'm shooting that, a plane flies overhead. And in my hour-long exposure, I've got this streak of a plane flying across there. Now, what they are generally doing these days is they're doing stacking. And so that's where instead of taking one great big long shot of a really long exposure, you might do each one maybe a minute long or 30 seconds long, something like that. And then you take a whole stack of those photos and then you put them into an image processing thing. What it then does is it looks at every individual image and rates it based on how sharp it is. If there's been some movement, it might be a bit blurry, or there might be a plane flying across some of those photos. It can just remove them from the stack. So the problem images can just be left behind. And then it just gets the good shots, and what it does is it starts looking at all of the pixels from all these different photos and then averaging them out. So if you've got some noise in the photos, again, from we're talking about before, if you're shooting with a high ISO and you've got, a fair bit of noise going on, what it can do is it can look at all the noise is never the same from one shot to the next. It has the randomness about it. And so when you take a particular pixel and you average it out across all of these photos, it can then bring you back a nice, smooth, kind of noiseless image, because by averaging out all of these stacked images. Hal, you're busting to say something about this.
I'm not an astrophotographer, but I hang out with them, and I may be talking a little bit out of turn here, but my understanding is that some of the software is getting really, really sophisticated. So first, a lot of the noise is random, but it's a lot of it has to do with the charge on the sensor, the temperature of the sensor. There's a lot of factors that are consistent. So if you get those temperatures, if you get something that's really consistent, you take a picture of the sky and you get your signal, and then you take a picture with the lens cap on, and you get just the noise. You can take, if you've got a picture of the signal and the noise and a picture of just the noise, you can subtract it. And a lot of this software now is doing, you use those as an input, and you use your series of images over the night sky is your input. And a lot of the times when you're stacking, you're actually doing additive stacking, which I can get into if you want. Another rabbit hole here. But a lot of this software is using machine learning to figure out where the randomness in the noise is coming from. Because once you've canceled out what noise you can cancel out, what's left is random. But a lot of it is actually consistent, that's specific to the sensor, to the temperature, to a lot of different factors that are part of the environment when you're shooting. And then if you've got a huge series of images, you can use machine learning to figure out what is signal and what is noise, or remove the noise. And there's some really cool stuff here. I can put you in touch with several astrophotographers if you want to do a real deep dive. It's really cool. There's some really cool stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, this is another thing you were mentioning about that idea of doing the subtraction. So with those stacking photos, you will generally take a photo of just white, and then you take a photo, as you say, with the lens cap on of the black, and then it'll use those as, sort of, it can then, like, for instance, if you have a CCD with a tiny little dark spot on it, and you'll see that on the white shot, and it'll use that to make an adjustment to make sure that little dark spot is,
I think you have more experience in this than I do.
Look, I haven't done it in a long time, but I did do it quite a bit back in the olden days. I've got an image here that I'm just going to grab. It's only a small image, but it is, or where did I put it? Did I put it in downloads?
I understand astrophotography from a purely conceptual point of view, technical conceptual point of view, and I have a lot of friends that are really into it, but I don't have a huge amount of experience with it. Yeah, that's right.
This is one of my photos of the Lagoon Nebula. This was taken back in 2005 with a Canon 300D, and that is 230-second exposures that ended up making up that image there. And it's where you get that sort of real smooth effect going on there rather than noise. If I were to show that to you, if I were to just take one of those 30-second exposures and then just brighten it up, it would be all full of noise and look terrible and ugly and all that sort of stuff. And it's that stacking that allows you to get that nice smooth end result there. But we have digressed a little.
Yeah.
So,
stacking is a really cool skill. I use that a lot for shooting architecture.
Yeah. Unfortunately, as a Mac user, there aren't that many Mac stacking applications. There are a couple, but the really good ones are generally on the Windows platform. So for anyone who is interested in learning about stacking.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, you can.
To get us even further off topic, I don't even know what the topics are. I closed the thing because I'm just talking. How important... I'm probably not going to phrase this the right way, but when I had my G3 blue and white, not a lot of horsepower to spare. Whatever photos I was editing was Photoshop 3, and I was limited because I didn't want to wait like 5 hours for a radial blur or some stupid thing I was doing. How important today are the capabilities of the camera hardware versus the capabilities of your computer? Like
shooting JPEGs with a digital camera, any digital camera, is like shooting Polaroids. You shoot a Polaroid, it comes straight out of the camera. You can give it to your friend. You can put it in your pocket. You can do whatever you want with it. You have this photo, maybe not immediately, but like almost immediately. JPEG, you can take it off your camera. You can put it on your phone. You can upload it to Instagram like that instantly. With a raw photo, that's more like a roll of film. So you have to get it into the lab. You have to process it. There's a lot more range on that piece of film than the print is ultimately going to have. So you can play with it in the lab. You can make it brighter, you can make it darker, you can make sections of it brighter or darker. You can, if you're talking about black and white photography, you can use filters on it to change how it looks in the darkroom or in the computer in Lightroom. But if you just cut off a piece of film or give someone, even if you give someone a slide, which is a cut from a piece of film, there's less that they can do with it. They can put it in a projector, but they can't share it as easily. There's, maybe they could make a print from it, but either way, you would give someone a print or you'd give someone a Polaroid. But if you gave someone a print, you had to take the film and process it. So when you're shooting JPEG, you've got your Polaroid, you can do whatever you want with it. But if you're shooting RAW, the RAW file format is proprietary to every individual camera that shoots it. If Canon or Nikon come out with a new camera, Lightroom has to update with the RAW decoder for that specific camera. What's being written to that file is exactly what the data from the sensor and maybe some metadata, but nothing more, nothing less. The camera itself has not touched it. When you get into Lightroom or Bridge or what's Phase 1's called? Phase 1 software, you can then manipulate that RAW file. I can't give you a RAW file and you can you could if you had Lightroom, but it's not as useful to you. You definitely couldn't upload it to Instagram. Instagram's not going to know what to do with a Canon 5DSR RAW file. But you can then export a JPEG from that. And when you're in Lightroom, you can decide, do I want to adjust for the highlights? Do I want to adjust for the shadows? Do I want to make this bluer? Do I want to make this warmer? You have everything that you can play with the fingertips because your camera has not actually touched that file. It's taken the image from the sensor and just dumped it to a card or to a piece of film in this case, or not in this case, in this example, and then you can do whatever you want with it in the lab. I think that's the way to think about RAW versus JPEG.
Yeah, and I don't know if this answers your question, Jay. Probably not. But if I'm
trying to think of what my question was, but I think it comes close. My question was, if I take my very first camera, or maybe the second one, let's not go overboard, today, can I ultimately produce better photos on my screen than I did back in 2003 or 2005? Thanks to the horsepower and the machine learning and all that stuff. Do I really need a $1,000 camera? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, because this is the thing: is that if your old camera was, say, storing files as JPEG, for example, you can still bring it into a new computer and you can play with the curves and you can play with, you know, sort of the saturation and sharpening and stuff. You can still do that. And maybe those tools have got a little bit better than they were on your G3 blue and white. But I would think at the end of the day, you'd probably end up with more or less the same photo from your old camera. You know, as Hal was just about to say there, that if you were shooting on an old camera that did shoot in RAW, that did capture that more information, you could potentially bring it into some newer software which might be better at processing that raw data into, you know, sort of that condensed image, that 24-bit image, output image. So you know, you might get a better result from an old raw image, but probably not so much from an old JPEG image from an old camera.
Because I'm a cell phone photographer, right? I don't update my phone every year anymore. I stopped doing that after the iPhone 6, but more since my kid was born. And I get the new phone because the camera gets better. But from what I see in their presentations, it's not the lenses, it's not the sensor, it's the software that analyzes everything that comes through this piece of glass. That's what keeps getting dramatically better. So that's why I'm thinking, hey, if I can apply
the sensor is also getting dramatically better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a sort of a kind of a fledgling industry. You know, this is something where it's, if you think about, if we were to go back, you know, even like 10 years, I mean, this idea of taking these incredible photos on your phone, I mean, it just wasn't really an option. And so everything is getting better. The lenses are getting better, the sensors are getting better, and the processing is getting better. So they're all improving with time. So
because my mom got an iPhone 13 last week, and she's like, "Oh, well, it's just a phone to me. I play my games." And I said, "Go," because when I'm talking to her, it's already nighttime for her. So I said, "Go outside, go have your cigarette, do whatever you do, point your camera at the backyard, and take a photo." She said, "No, I can't. I got no light there." I said, "Just do it." She came back inside, mind blown. It's like the sun is shining. What the hell? And that's when she discovered what her phone is.
Of this?
Oh, please do.
So I went to Egypt back in March. You guys have probably seen this picture. I went to Egypt with my sister's family back in March, and one night we were can't even remember where we were at. Yeah, there he is. And I was taking a picture of this little Sphinx statue with some city lights in the background. And I had just bought an iPhone 13 Pro, Max, whatever the heck the bigger one is.
Moving on, that's
it's got the fancy 3 lenses on the back. And the one apparently is for, you know, nighttime shots, low light level shots. And when I'm taking a picture of this statue with the city lights in the background, and I noticed that the shutter stays open for a long time. And when it was done, this is the picture I got. And I had no idea that tree was there.
Yeah.
I mean, the iPhone picked all that up. I thought I was looking at, you know, the statue. Of course, there was a light at the base of the statue that was shining on my eyes. So maybe that's why I didn't see the tree. But I had no idea they were there. And it picked all that up. And if I was able to zoom in on this, you could see, I mean, you can see the individual fronds and things. It's really good.
One of the things that the phones are now doing, the newer phones, they are actually shooting a range of, you know, different exposures, and then blending it all together. And that's a really, really important part where the power of the phone is really coming into play there. Yeah. So
my understanding is they're using,
go ahead.
Sorry. My understanding is that the way that they're getting so sharp at night, when you get that little like crosshairs to try to keep it in the middle there, it's taking a constant range of images, but it's also recording the gyroscope data as you handle the phone and using that to layer. It's cool stuff. It's stuff that, you know, you normally, if you want a photo with a DSLR, you need a tripod, and this is doing it without a tripod.
One thing really worth mentioning, just having a look at that phone, is the fact that it has 3 lenses, and that's a really important thing when it comes to, I guess, the laws of physics associated to taking a photo. So I've got a 15 to 85 mil here. and it allows me to shoot quite a reasonable range. This is just a good all-rounder. Allows me to get reasonable wide-angle shots if I'm shooting, you know, sort of a group of people, and I can zoom in a little bit if I'm, I don't know, at the zoo and want to get a photo of a, you know, sort of an animal or something like that. Now, this is my phone. Now, if I was to put this on my phone, it stops being a practical use. Now, that's why cameras are using multiple lenses, because they don't have the width in the device to layer the amount of glass required to create a lens that is going to have a wide range of zoom. So what they do instead is they use 3 separate lenses with different you know, sort of telephoto capabilities. You might have a wide, you might have a mid-range, and then you'll have a zoom. And then the camera, when you're, you know, doing the little dial to whether you're wanting to zoom in or out, it'll just flick over from one lens to the next. I mean, you can actually see the moment it transitions when you're doing it, but it's actually using 3 different lenses because there just is not the physical space in the device to make a lens like this. And
I was just about to bring that up.
So yes, right. I mean, it is 3 different cameras. So there's actually a separate sensor behind each lens, and it's having to be done that way because they're cramming it into a device that's that big.
Yeah, and I know that they make this. This is a camera for stupid people. Sorry, I'm offending everybody that's watching, because who uses an Android? Come on. But it really annoys me when I try to take a picture. Like I have something under the microscope. I don't want to fire up the computer, so I can use the camera. I just put my lens on the what's it called? The little eyepiece of the microscope. I get it just right. I zoom in, and whoop, it shifts to the camera on that side, and everything goes black. So I shift my phone, and it's like, wait, what are you doing? It shifts back. Taking a picture of something in my microscope is impossible with these newer phones. It pisses me off.
What I find interesting is how much different the iPhone and the Android images look. You can take 2 pictures of the same thing, and they look completely different because there is a lot in the software in the phone about how the phone is interpreting what it thinks is going to make a really good image, where it should place the highlights, where it should place the shadows, how it should expose. Because I think there's some software for iPhone that allows you to really dial in the exposure and whatnot. But for the most part, if you're just using the camera app and you take a picture, it's trying to do the processing for you in real time to get you a shareable image, and what Apple thinks are things in the image that, or what Apple thinks are aspects of an image that are more desirable, and what Google thinks are aspects of an image that are more desirable to have their software, which I think they've used a lot of machine learning to train, are completely different. With film, like you've got a Canon and a Nikon, and if they're using the same roll of film, and you know, qualities of lenses aside, you're going to get the same image.
The same thing.
Well, that's something I've always seen in the reviews in previous years. Apple releases iPhone 25. Let's stack it up against blah, 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 blah. And a lot of people say, oh, well, iPhone has a 12 megapixel camera. My Android here has a 500 megapixel camera. And it still results crappier photos than the new iPhone. It's 90% of the time in these face-off challenge videos, the iPhone does better. Even though it's on paper significantly less hardware than its counterpart.
Well, Bruce, you wanted to mention in your note stock, you were talking about the megapixel war, which I think is kind of dead at this point. But there's also an interesting thing. I think there's an Android phone that is 100 megapixels. But we could go into like how megapixels aren't the whole story, how you want, you know, dynamic range and the sharpness of the lens is part of the story. At some point, like even with DSLRs, I've got 50 megapixel DSLRs, and I've got lenses that aren't sharp enough to take advantage of that sensor. But they're, besides just the number of megapixels to slap on the camera, besides that not being the whole story, because there's so many other factors besides sharpness of lens and the depth of the dynamic range, you also have pixel binning, where do you know about pixel binning, Bruce?
Sorry, so what was it?
Pixel binning.
Binning?
So
I don't know.
This is what a lot of so you see this a lot more in the video world, but So when a raw image is taken, to just blast through some real heavy weed stuff here, there's a mosaic. So in a digital camera, each pixel is not necessarily just red, green, or blue. It's I'll use a video example because this is going to be a lot easier to explain. So a lot of 4K consumer cameras are actually a 1080p camera, or 4 1080p cameras. So each pixel, one pixel is only sensitive to red, one pixel is only sensitive to green, one pixel is only sensitive to blue, and one pixel is only sensitive to the brightness of the room. So your color pixels don't actually need to be as sensitive, and specifically red pixels are not as sensitive as blue and green because the wavelength is longer. So what you wind up with is 4 1080p images, and then in software it becomes a 4K image. So if you've ever wondered what when you see like 420 pull down or 422 pull down or 444 pull down, when you're looking at how many megapixels a still camera is, look at what the pull down is. Because if it's a 4K image at 444 pull down, that is a actual 4K image. And to be more specific, it's 4 4K images: one 4K image that's red, one 4K image that's blue, one 4K image that's green, and one 4K image that's your Luma data. You get a 4K image. So each pixel can be any number of those 16.7 million colors. But when your pull down is 422 or 420, each pixel can only be red, and you have this range of colors, and the next pixel over can only be green and this range of colors. So that's how you're getting cameras that are saying, oh, it's a 100 megapixel camera. Really, it's a 25 megapixel camera, which isn't bad, but the sensor isn't taking each individual pixel, and that pixel is able to represent the full range of color. It's only able to represent one of 3 colors, or the luminance of one of 3 colors. So
it's creative wordplay.
Yeah. The sort of the megapixel, what I call the megapixel myth. I was thinking of that more along the lines of the consumer level cameras, where you might someone might bring out a new camera and it's dirt cheap, but it's like way more megapixels than sort of other cameras around there. And I guess the point that I was trying to make from that is that with this, I will get a better photo with this old 300D and whatever megapixels it was, compared to a dirt cheap, poor quality lens, rubbishy camera that might say it's twice as many, megapixels. I guess the general thing I'm saying is that for a lot of people, they measure, and this is because of the way these things are sold, but for a lot of people, the measure of a good camera is how many megapixels it is, and talking specific people, and we're talking, again, we're talking consumer level here. We're not talking necessarily professional equipment, but I've had people come to me saying, "Oh, I've just got this new camera, and it's however many megapixels," and to them it was that number that made them buy the camera, not necessarily.
Totally. And the camera makers know that. And they're competing on that for the longest time.
And it's just, as I say, it's just, I think it's something that people need to kind of be aware of, that it is a number that, people relate to now, higher the megapixel, sort of the better the image, but that isn't necessarily always the case.
Zoom in on the image. Are you going to be able to see, if you zoom in so you can see the pixels, are you seeing a bunch of noise in there? Or are you seeing, if you've got something that's white here and something that's black here, is the line between white and black sharp, or is it a little bit hazy? If it's a little bit hazy, it doesn't matter that you've got more pixels to represent that haze. Your lens isn't sharp, or maybe your lens is sharp, but your autofocus isn't very good, or maybe your lens is sharp and your autofocus is good, but your sensor's pixel binned, so you're not, what's actually recorded in the file is not what's necessarily come off the sensor, or they've kind of reinterpreted it in software a little bit.
One thing that I just wanted to mention at the moment is just also the concept of aperture. So and again, this relates to the whole thing with the smartphone cameras, you know, that might have multiple lenses and stuff like that. So this is a 50mm lens. It's not a particularly expensive one, but it's a fixed width one. It's not a zoomy one. This only shoots 50mm, and so and as you can see, that's quite a large, you know, hole in the middle of it there, and that means it's basically got a reasonably wide aperture, so it can let a lot of light in. Now, with that concept of aperture, what happens is the more light that you let in, you can basically shoot in lower light, you know, so you can pick up more in lower light because more light is being let in. But the trade-off for that is that you have a narrower depth of field. So if you're trying to focus on something and it's at a certain distance, let's say I was trying to take a photo of my face, I might get the tip of my nose nice and sharp, but then my eyes might be blurry or my ears might be blurry because that depth of field, that range in which things are in focus, is quite narrow. By contrast, if I were to shoot through a very small aperture, a very small amount of light getting let through, I actually get a wider depth of field. Not as much light is getting through, so I might have to shoot for a longer exposure, but I will get a wider depth of field. So if I'm photographing my nose might be sharp and my ear might be sharp as well. Now, one of the things that's often quite desirable in photography, in particular if you're doing portrait photography, is to have the foreground nice and sharp and the background blurry. And that's where you actually deliberately want a narrow depth of field. And so you might actually, you know, shoot with f-stop is the smaller the number, the bigger the aperture. And so you might shoot that with a low f-stop so that you deliberately narrow your depth of field so that what's in the front of the image is going to be sharp and what's behind it is blurry. And that blurriness, it's I think a Japanese term. I think it's called bokeh or something like that. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I've only ever seen it written.
It refers to the quality of those circles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that does depend on the glass you're shooting through. Now, I wanted to just mention that if you have an iPhone and you shoot in the portrait mode, you can get the foreground sharp and the background blurry. But interestingly enough, because of the size of those lenses, they don't have the ability to open up to an aperture wide enough to get that sort of narrow depth of field. So what they actually do is, by using the multiple cameras, they actually do image processing to make the foreground sharp and the background blurry. So you end up sort of simulating. Cool, it's amazing. And look, you cannot argue with the quality of those photos coming out of the iPhone that are shot in portrait. You know, they are magnificent. But interestingly enough, they are creating an effect that you get from a wide aperture using image processing in the device. And then, you know, working with the different lenses to actually get that end result. And that is actually something, you know, where, you know, sort of, I guess, sort of talking about what you've been talking about, Jay, with, you know, using smartphone cameras. It's not just, you know, it's not just the convenience of having the camera there. With the computing power in these phones these days, you open yourself up to a whole range of things, whether it be doing that portrait shot, or where some of them actually start to create simulations of different lighting effects, or of course the some of the effects that we're seeing these days where you can actually remove people from the photo that you know you don't want in the photo. You can actually go in and circle around them and press a button and it'll actually delete someone from the photo, or it'll automatically etch you out of the background, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I found that by accident one day when I took a picture of a friend of mine and somebody else, and I wanted to zoom in, and I only actually touched the screen with one finger because I didn't do it right. But anyway, just holding my finger on my friend, it automatically outlined them and let me move them around the screen. And I was like, this is awesome. Yeah. I've been doing this in Photoshop for years, but it takes, like, you know, several minutes to outline somebody. But the phone just goes, oh, there's a person. And it just moved them around. And it didn't matter. I tried it with different photos. It didn't matter what, you know, pose they were in or what they were wearing. Most of the time it got everything just right. And I was like, how does it do?
So, Bruce, I got two things to show you.
Yes, yep. Hal's got some show and tell here.
Yeah, first, this is an f/0.95 micro four thirds lens. It's a Voigtlander Noctilux. I use it. So with your with depth of field, there are three factors at play to get more or less depth of field. It's the distance to your subject. The closer to your subject you are, the more behind them is going to be out of focus, given all other things being equal. One of the other things being equal is the size of the sensor. So this is a prime lens for a micro four thirds camera, which is a significantly smaller sensor than a full frame. So given if you've got a 25 mil lens on a micro four thirds sensor, which is equivalent to a 50 mil lens on a full frame, you're going to have less depth of field available. So your background is going to be less out of focus. So this lens overcompensates for that. And it does overcompensate because f0.95 is very, very large hole. And your focal length, so how wide it is. The wider your shot is, the more depth of field you're going to have. So if you're zoomed in on something, all other things being equal, the background is going to be more in focus for your subject. So with that said, this is a tilt shift lens.
Oh yes, I love these.
It's completely obsolete by today's standards. You can do this in Photoshop almost as well, about 95% of the way there. At least most people won't be able to tell that you didn't shoot with this thing. This is super expensive and I never use it. But you can...
I'll give you $50.
Want a little more than that, but you can change the focal plane. So normally when you're shooting straight on, your focal plane is relative to the plane of the sensor. So if the sensor is here and I'm here, the background is going to be out of focus. But if I wanted the top of my head to be out of focus and my chest to be out of focus, but my eyes to be in focus, and maybe this random part of the desk back here to be in focus, you could use this, which is this is actually
I've never seen that before.
Well, so the
also
if let's just say, for example, you were going to do some, let's just say you had a model and that model was incredibly super realistic.
Wow.
And you wanted to take a photo of that model to make it look like it was real. One of the things that will give away that is a model and not real is that because you're a lot closer to the subject, your depth of field will be a lot narrower. So when you go take a photo of that model, you might get something that's sharp here, but then a little further away, it's blurry. And it creates this illusion or creates this image in your head that what you're photographing is very small. So, you know, you know that what is being photographed is small because of that depth of field. Now, what the tilt shift did, it was all the rage a few years ago. You were seeing it in ads all the time. People were setting them up and doing time-lapse photography.
Yeah, I did a lot. That is why I bought this thing.
Yeah, so of like a street corner of people walking backwards and forwards on a street corner, they would do the tilt shift that would create this illusion of a very narrow depth of field, which would then make it look like you were filming miniature items rather than they were actually real life. And there are lots of examples, and I may even put an example of that overlay it on this when I cut this together, because it was a very, you know, it was a very sort of it was done to death for a while there. Just about every TV ad seemed to be using that effect. But that's where that tilt shift comes in. It creates an illusion of a narrow depth of field.
When it looks like you're looking at the miniature stuff, that's called tilt shift?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So what this lens is specifically for is it is a very specific type of architecture lens. And the reason for that is if you're taking a picture of a building, you're going to be standing on the ground looking up at it. And the building is going to get... as it gets further away, because of perspective, it's going to get narrower towards the top. The shift allows you, so that's tilting. This is tilting. This is shifting. So what the shift allows you to do, because the lens is round, if you shoot through the side of the lens, it perspective corrects. So if you're looking up at a building and you shift it, you can straighten out the lines of the building. So it looks like you're looking at it straight on, even if you're standing on the ground looking straight up at it. The reason for the tilt part of it is that when you change that, when you straighten that out, your depth of field plane is then shifted. So it kind of intersects the building. And the top of your building, the exact opposite of that. The top of your building is going to be out of focus and the bottom of your building is going to be out of focus, but the center is in focus because keep in mind, you're looking up at it. So when you run it, when you then shift it, when you then tilt it, you can bring your depth of field plane in line with the focus of the building. So the front of your building can be in focus and what's behind it can be out of focus and your lines are straight. That is specifically what this is designed for. these are all things that you can do in Photoshop extremely easily that you could not do when you were shooting film, when you needed to get it right, when you needed to get it right in pre. With digital cameras, especially with time-lapse, these became completely useless. I probably paid $2,500 for this lens about 15 years ago. I haven't used it in 10 years. I used it a ton to shoot time-lapse with it because if you find some examples, it looks really cool. When you use it backwards, when you've got your depth of field plane running sideways through an image, yeah, it looks like you're looking down at a miniature. And the bokeh is really nice on it. But yeah, this had a very specific function in film photography, which is completely obsolete.
Yeah, like for example, this photo, I know what I'm looking at. I know this was a real size thing with real size people. But that's not.
This looks like it was done in post.
And my brain just can't handle it. This stuff messes me up. I don't know why.
At this, and this isn't a real tilt shift. That's been done in post. That's been done. In I can tell you what the tells are. But
and especially in video. I mean, it's bad for me in images, but when I see this in video, it messes me up for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's
I don't
cool.
know why.
But yeah,
now,
that's what this thing does.
Given the fact that we've now been talking for quite some time, what we might do is just spend a little bit of time just talking about software. And then I think
I have a question.
Okay, well, after your question.
Okay.
I can come back to the next one too.
Yes,
this is
we're going to have to do one on videography as well. Videography, so yes.
So over the last hour and a half, I've heard the term WDR or wide dynamic range quite a few times, but I have yet to hear about HDR, which in my opinion is extremely overused, and I find it disgusting because 90% of people don't use it accurately. Is it the same, just a newer iteration? Is it completely different? What is HDR with WDR?
HDR photography, which where you see an image that sort of has like lots of detail in the highlights and lots of detail in the shadows. It's been created from tone mapping. So that's another way of taking something that's like, so if your camera, I don't know what let's say it's 8 stops of dynamic range that's capable of. Modern DSLRs are somewhere in the range of like 12, 13, 14. But if you've got these really dark shadows like a tunnel and then this really blue bright sky, those might be 20 stops apart in the scene. So in order to capture all of that, when you're just shooting it, either your shadows are going to be completely dark or the light at the end of the tunnel is going to be this bright white light. But if you want both in there, you bracket. So you shoot 10 different photos, 7 different photos that are a few stops apart, and then you layer them together in Photoshop, which gives you an HDR image. You could pull detail out of the highlights or the shadows, or you can tone map it, which uses software to sort of intelligently calculate, okay, we want all of these different ranges in this image to be the same luminosity value. So your shadows have roughly the same luminosity value as your highlights, and you get this sort of like hyper-realistic, oh my God, I'm on acid kind of look to it. That's
they almost look painted sometimes.
Yeah, because your eyes don't see dynamic range in the same way that cameras do. Your eyes see dynamic range in more of a linear way, whereas cameras are seeing it in this what's what I'm thinking of, logarithmic way. So in order to get to flatten this logarithmic curve into a linear image, you can tone map it, and that's sort of the HDR style. But you've basically crushed 20 stops over here and 10 stops over here into one image. And there's different tone mapping software. Photoshop can actually do it decently well, depending on how well you're talking about. It's personally not my taste. But you want an image where your highlights are like 18% gray and your shadows are 18% gray, and it's just got this like super hyper real look to it. Because
I've seen photos where like iPhone has been doing this for the last few years, where I take a picture of my kid with the sun behind him. I see my kid as a silhouette, and now I can actually see my kid and the sunset. But then there's also photos where you take a picture of a field and the grass is this disgusting neon green. All the colors are way over the top. And that seems to be the norm in most photos I see, and especially on TVs.
It's a taste, So for architecture stuff, I'm doing something that's not unlike that, where you want all the tones in the image to be even, but I'm going around the room with the light. So with still photography, you can do that. I'm taking a whole bunch of different exposures where things are lit in different places, and I'm layering those together. I can pull up some examples for you. if you're shooting video and you've got a director of photography and a whole grip truck on you, you can light a scene perfectly like that with, you know, a truck full of lights. But when you're shooting photos and you're just one person here. So here's Lightroom. Here's a couple different things I shot for clients. This is it's a recording studio. No, this is a coloring studio for film and TV. So this room, these lights here are completely different luminosity to the lights on the desk, to the lights on the wall, to the lights on the ceiling. So in order, if you went in and just took a picture of this room on your own, it would be very dark, and or if you brightened it up, your lights would be blown out. So this is made up of a whole bunch of different layers to layer this together. This one, likewise, we're trying to get the image on the screen to balance the image of the board, but we also want the lights that are actually quite dim in the real world
like
and this black sofa together.
Yeah, right.
But we want it to actually look natural so that they can sell the recording studio to the client. Here's another example.
Those photos look really good, actually.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you've done these, you've deployed these little tricks to capture all of it, but they don't look unrealistic.
Right. But it's the same technique. This is a furniture store in San Francisco. I've got a few different examples of this, and I can go into what the layers are in the file. But there are objects in the image that are black, and there are objects in the image that are sort of a nice tone. But I want to bring out the detail in all of it, and yet make it look natural. Because if you were to just walk in and take a picture, the light wouldn't be very good. It's a furniture store. It's not a studio. So. Let's see if I can just open this in Photoshop. I can pull up my layers. This might take a minute.
Well, while we wait, I should mention that only people like you should be allowed to take photos of their lunch or dinner, which people seem to do all the time. Like,
I think anybody should be allowed to take pictures of.
Yeah.
Well, I'll show you how I pull this off. Actually, it's opening in Photoshop, but I think I can give you a better example just in much more quickly in put a folder in library.
All these people on Facebook and Instagram. Look what I had for lunch. That looks absolutely disgusting. You should not be allowed to take a picture of that.
That's what Instagram is for, isn't it?
Art can be whatever. So here we go. These are before we've layered it. So this is the image that came straight out of my camera, unadjusted. This is what it looked like in the store.
Everything I just saw makes up the final photo?
Yes. Yep. Wow. So here's this is a bracket. So it's not loading, but this is the HDR bracket you're talking about. So I started with this. I started with several different. Oh, well, here's my Photoshop file. So here's the different brackets here that made up the first HDR base layer, which is here in my Photoshop file. And then I went around with a light. There it is. I got a shot with just the light coming off the lamp and everything else is dark. I got a shot where the light is filling in this foreground here. And then I kind of went around. You can see the edge of my light here. I'm kind of going around and getting different shadows. So here I'm actually in the other room kind of shoving some light through here. And these on their own are not super attractive images, but here I've got the pillow. Here I've got this plant, which is creating this kind of nice rim. And at some point you'll see some photos of me. Where are they? Kind of holding this light to kind of fill in the detail. So here I'll actually mask this out and just use this little edge here.
I will admit, I had no idea this much went into taking a photo like that. No idea.
It takes about an hour per photo for these recording studios. Here's me. Here's a self-portrait with my gut sticking out. But I'm just lighting different things in this room. And this is a very attractive photo of me. Just lighting different things in this room, and then I'll bring it into the Photoshop file, and we can actually turn on and off these lights individually. We should be able to, maybe. There we go. See how that layer gets turned on and off? So it's almost like I'm turning on this light on and off in the room. So
that's cool.
If you're shooting a film, you don't have this option, you've got to actually have 20 different lights in here. But because of additive photography, which is the same thing you're talking about with Astro, we can go in and add these different layers one at a time.
It's amazing. The thing is that each one of those layers that you flick off and on, it's such a small component of the final image, but it is also such an important part. You know, when you switch it off, you notice it. You notice it being gone. You know, it's amazing stuff. Yeah.
But this is what the tilt shift stuff is for. This is what, oh, this isn't what tilt shift is for. This is what, you know, lighting. We're trying to get everything in this even look to it, and it's actually completely not natural, but it looks more natural than it would look like if we just went in and took a picture of it. Of course, this isn't white balanced, but assuming I white balanced it, well, I can white balance it right now. This is what it would look like straight out of camera, which is not bad, but it's not the image we want.
To me, yeah,
yeah, and that's what I'd submit. Here's your photo. That's it for me.
When we start getting into the some of the recording studios, I mean, I'll open some of those files. Maybe not on this show, but you know, some of these rooms are quite large, and we need to balance little details in the image to kind of show off, you know, some of the edges. So if we're shooting the wood, if we were to light it in a certain way, these surfaces would actually be too shiny, but we still want some highlight detail in these highlights. Anyway, that's
it's amazing stuff. It really is incredible. And I guess to some extent, that probably just brings us to the last bit that I just wanted to talk about. And we'll probably have to zoom through this either. And I can see us heading for a second episode again.
This is fun. I'm down to do this anytime.
Part two. I just wanted to have a quick little chat about different software types, because when it comes to digital photography, I really see there as being three different aspects of it. One is image management. One is image edit. Well, editing is the wrong word. Let's say adjustment, and by that I mean things like color, you know, white balance, brightness, you know, that sort of thing. I see that as sort of like adjustment, and then image editing or retouching, that side of things. Now, it's clear from looking at what you were showing us there that you are using Lightroom for your image management and just the like color adjustments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. And then Photoshop for your image editing, which, let's face it, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone uses anything else these days.
To be perfectly honest, I probably use Lightroom 95% of the time and Photoshop less than 5% of the time. I try not to go into Photoshop. I mean, I know it's not my favorite tool. It works. It does the job great. But more and more features are coming into Lightroom from Photoshop that allow me to just stay in Lightroom, and it's fantastic. I couldn't be happier with that progression. That said, like, with our business, we have other retouchers that we send stuff out to. So the amount of stuff that goes into Photoshop and comes back is actually more than what I spend in Photoshop. But anyway, Photoshop's great. If I could just do everything in Lightroom, I would do absolutely everything in Lightroom.
Yeah, I imagine, Hal, that you have a whole, you know, methods and techniques for being able to find photos in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many photos are in this Lightroom library, 614,000. And I've got another Lightroom library with over 3 million. So I don't know, I've got a system set up for finding stuff.
Do you have used keywords and stuff, I assume?
I was for a while. Like, anything I've shot between like 2008 and 2015 is like perfectly keyworded. And most recent stuff, it's like, it's either I'm shooting it for Getty Images, or I'm shooting it for a client, or I'm shooting it for personal work. And there's a folder for each one. And when I come back from a shoot, it gets dumped into a folder with the client's name on it. And then there's a subfolder called All, and there's some folder called Pics. And then Pics get slowly narrowed down, and those are all categorized with the date. And then stuff I'm shooting for Getty Images, without getting too specific, they have a batch code system. So everything in Lightroom for Getty Images shoots are using their batch codes. So they're synced on their system and on my system. But yeah, I mean, I could show you my subfolders here, but it's split up by client, by date, and I can find anything super quick. The keywords aren't quite as useful for me anymore.
Okay. So you're not in a situation where you're like, hey, I want to find all the photos with, I don't know, green trees in them or something. I want to find all the photos with ferns or something like that. You don't.
Yeah, the only reason I would need to do that is to license it to somebody, and they could do that on gettyimages.com or iStockphoto.com, and that's already handled. So our keywording pipeline is their keywording pipeline at this point, because we're on contract with them, so we're exclusive. Before I was exclusive with them, we did all our keywording internally, but since we've kind of hitched ourselves to that horse, we're using their system, and that's fine. What I was going to say though is I do really like Lightroom. It is not a perfect piece of software depending on what you're doing. A lot of my colleagues who are doing a lot more fashion stuff than I am, fashion and product, really love Capture One. So that's another option that's out there if you're trying to, and this is a real thing, if you're trying to stay away from the Adobe world, which there are very good reasons to do. Yes. I'm stuck with Adobe, and like I'm not super thrilled with it, but like it's pretty good. It's fine. It does the job. Lightroom's great, but yeah, if we want alternatives to Lightroom, Capture One is a good alternative to Lightroom.
Okay, no, good to know.
Awesome. Adobe Bridge. I get a little nervous when people say Adobe Bridge, because most of my professional career troubleshooting and fixing Mac-related stuff has involved, especially in the PowerPC days. Oh, you have Adobe Bridge installed. Uninstall it, your system will be fine. Has that improved in recent years?
I don't use Bridge because Lightroom is Bridge. Like all the core software that makes Bridge work is what makes Lightroom work, and Lightroom gives you the addition of file management. So Lightroom is Bridge with file management. Bridge is for if you've got a raw file and you want to open it in Photoshop. Photoshop doesn't do all the raw processing. Bridge does. So you open the raw file, you do your pre-processing in Bridge, and then bring it into Photoshop. But you can do the same thing with Lightroom. So anything Bridge can do, and I don't quote me on this, but like 99% of what Bridge can do, Lightroom can do. They're the same. Like the core software of Lightroom is Bridge, but Lightroom also gives you additional file management.
I am going to quote you on that.
So, I know people that still use Bridge and don't use Lightroom, so I don't know why. But if someone can give me a really good reason why, I'm really open. I'm really curious why. Not to like honestly, I want to know why people are using Bridge because I don't see why it exists. But maybe there's some other photographers will be like, Hal, you're an idiot. Here's why you should use Bridge. And I'll say, okay, cool, fair enough. So.
Well, I think based on how long we've been going for, we should probably wrap things up. That's not to say that we won't necessarily have to come back and do another one at a later date, because I think we've covered pretty much everything that we set out to do. But you're
going to get a bunch of because photographers are the most opinionated people, and there are 100 people that disagree with me on every single.
We welcome comments.
Yep. Leave the comments leave your comments in the comments. Say whatever you have to say about what we've been talking about here. Be opinionated. That's fine. We're happy with that.
We didn't start this because we're experts at whatever we're talking about. We like to explore stuff we know, stuff we don't know. So any feedback is welcome.
I mean, let's face it. I mean, the only reason why we have digital cameras at all is so that we can take photos of our food before we eat it. I mean, that's the main purpose for digital cameras. A lot of
that on my phone.
And cats.
And cats.
A lot of cats on my phone too.
I have nothing against food photography. If you could show me a picture of what you had for lunch, and I'm like, oh, I want that. I don't even know what it is. Is that a squid? I don't care. I want it. It looks that good. Fine. But most of the people I know can't do that. They can take the most beautifully crafted sandwich and make it look like it's been there for 10 years. And it's just disgusting. So I think there should be a law against that. An exam you have to take to show that you can do it before you're allowed to do it.
Well, for me, there should be a law against not being able to tuck into the food because someone wants to take a photo of it first. You either take the photo fast enough or you miss out. As far as I'm concerned, when someone puts food in front of me, I am hoeing into it. If you can't get your photo in the 0.7 seconds it takes from the moment it hits the table for me to eat it, if you can't get your photo in that time, you're going to miss out. Sorry. It's just how it works.
Yep.
Okay. Well, look, Hal, thank you very much for being on the show. Your knowledge is breathtaking. So we may well get you back, because we are probably going to do a show on videography in the future, and it sounds to me like you would be the expert for that. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yep, most welcome, and thank you to Jay and Dana for your time as well. And I think that's it until the next show. Again, please leave your comments if you have any. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we hope to see you at the next show. So, bye-bye.
Adios.
3, 2, 1. Hi there, my name is Bruce, and
Can't even get your name right. Come on.
That's a good start, isn't it?